History Bards Podcast historical content episode featuring the Berlin Airlift and Helena P. Schrader's historical novel, Cold Peace. The Berlin Airlift, Operation Vittles, the Devastation of Berlin, and the Candy Bomber. Dividing Berlin, Allies' strategy to shape post-World War II Europe. The division of Berlin among the Allies during World War II played a significant role in shaping the post-war landscape of Europe. As the war drew to a close, the victorious Allies, the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France, developed a plan to divide and govern Berlin, the capital of Nazi Germany. This historical content episode explores the motivations, negotiations, and implementation of the division plan, shedding light on the challenges faced and the long-lasting consequences of this historic decision. In July 1945, the Potsdam Conference took place, where the Allied leaders, Harry S. Truman, Joseph Stalin, and Winston Churchill, later replaced by Clement Attlee, gathered to discuss the future of Germany and Europe. The primary objectives of the Allies were to establish peace, hold the Nazi regime accountable, and ensure a stable post-war order. The division of Berlin became a crucial component of their strategy. The agreement reached at the Potsdam Conference resulted in the division of Germany into 4 zones, each to be administered by one of the Allied powers. Berlin, although situated in the Soviet zone, was also divided into 4 sectors controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. Each power would govern its sector, and the city's overall administration would be overseen by a joint council. The negotiations surrounding the division of Berlin were complex and presented several challenges. Tensions arose due to ideological differences and competing interests among the Allies. The Soviet Union sought to maintain a strong presence in Berlin, while the Western Allies aimed to prevent the complete Soviet domination of the city. Disputes regarding economic policies, access to resources, and the treatment of German citizens further complicated the negotiations. In 1948, the Soviet Union implemented a blockade on West Berlin, cutting off all land and water access to the city in an attempt to assert its control. In response, the Western Allies launched the Berlin Airlift, an extraordinary operation that involved flying supplies into West Berlin to sustain its population. The airlift not only ensured the survival of the city but also demonstrated the resolve of the Western Allies against Soviet aggression. The division of Berlin had far-reaching consequences for the city and the broader Cold War dynamics. The construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, separating East and West Berlin, symbolized the deepening divide between the democratic Western Bloc and the communist Eastern Bloc. The division became a tangible representation of the ideological and political tensions of the Cold War era. The plan to divide Berlin among the Allies during World War II was a pivotal moment in history that shaped the post-war world order. Although intended as a temporary arrangement, the division became a defining feature of the city and the Cold War itself. The negotiations and challenges faced during this process underscored the competing interests and ideological divisions among the victorious powers. Understanding the complexities and legacy of the Berlin division offers valuable insights into the history of the 20th century and the dynamics of international relations. The aftermath of World War II left Europe in ruins, with economies shattered, cities demolished, and millions of people displaced and impoverished. In this challenging scenario, the United States initiated the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, as a comprehensive aid package to assist war-torn nations in rebuilding their economies. This ambitious initiative not only helped revive Europe but also fostered economic stability, political cooperation, and long-term peace in the region. The Marshall Plan took shape against the backdrop of a war-ravaged Europe struggling to overcome the devastations of World War II. Proposed by U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall in a commencement speech at Harvard University in June 1947, the plan aimed to provide substantial economic assistance to European nations.
Against any country or doctrine but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos.
To implement the Marshall Plan, the United States established the Economic Cooperation Administration, ECA, in 1948. The ECA coordinated the allocation of aid funds, facilitated trade, and oversaw the overall reconstruction efforts. The aid was dispersed in the form of grants, loans, and goods, and recipient nations had the flexibility to design their own recovery programs within the broad framework of the plan. Participating countries formed the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, OEEC, to coordinate their efforts and ensure efficient utilization of aid. The Marshall Plan had a profound impact on Europe, transforming the continent's economic, political, and social landscape. Economically, the plan facilitated the restoration of infrastructure, revitalized industries, and boosted agricultural production. It also encouraged the adoption of modern technologies and management practices, leading to increased productivity and competitiveness. The infusion of capital and the expansion of trade led to a rise in living standards and helped alleviate poverty. Politically, the Marshall Plan fostered cooperation and unity among European nations. Through joint planning and coordination, countries worked together to prioritize projects and address common challenges. The plan also strengthened transatlantic ties, creating a long-lasting alliance between the United States and Europe. The plan's impact extended beyond economics and politics. By providing hope and stability, the Marshall Plan helped stem the tide of communism in Western Europe. It offered a viable alternative to radical ideologies, enticing nations to embrace democracy and market economies. The plan played a pivotal role in preventing the spread of communism, as it offered tangible benefits to countries willing to align themselves with Western values. The Marshall Plan emerged as a watershed moment in post-war Europe, demonstrating the power of international cooperation and humanitarian aid. By investing in the economic revival of war-torn nations, the United States laid the foundation for a prosperous and peaceful Europe. The plan's far-reaching impact is evident in the enduring stability, economic integration, and transatlantic partnership that emerged in the subsequent decades. The Marshall Plan remains an exemplar of successful reconstruction and serves as a reminder of the importance of collective efforts in times of adversity. Its legacy serves as a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the ability to rebuild even in the face of immense challenges. World War II was a catastrophic event that profoundly impacted cities, nations, and individuals across the globe. Among the most affected was Berlin, the capital city of Germany. As the epicenter of Nazi power and a primary target for Allied forces, Berlin experienced significant devastation and endured the physical, emotional, and social scars of war. Berlin faced relentless bombing campaigns by the Allied forces, aiming to cripple Nazi Germany. Beginning in 1940 and escalating until the war's end in 1945, the city was subjected to intense air raids that devastated its infrastructure, reducing much of it to rubble. The bombings claimed the lives of approximately 50,000 Berliners, displaced countless others, and left the city in ruins. The destruction forced residents to confront the horrors of war on a daily basis, shattered their lives, and left deep psychological scars. The citizens of Berlin experienced immense loss and displacement during World War II. Many lost family members, friends, and loved ones due to the conflict. The forced conscription of young men into the German military resulted in the separation of families, leaving women, children, and the elderly to navigate the challenges of survival alone. The extensive destruction of homes and neighborhoods forced thousands to seek shelter in overcrowded and makeshift accommodations, exacerbating their sense of loss and dislocation. The citizens of Berlin endured significant psychological trauma throughout World War II. The constant threat of bombings, the loss of loved ones, and the harrowing experiences of displacement and hunger took a toll on their mental health. The destruction of familiar landmarks and the pervasive atmosphere of fear and uncertainty created a sense of helplessness and despair. Survivors carried the trauma of the war long after its end, influencing their personal lives, relationships, and post-war experiences. The capture of Berlin fell to the Red Army, and the battle for Berlin was bitter and brutal. Between 100,000 and 125,000 Berliners were killed in the Soviet assault on the city. Of these, only about 20,000 were military casualties, including the old men and youths the Nazis had drafted into the Wehrmacht at the last minute. The civilian casualties included not just Berlin residents but tens of thousands of refugees who had fled to the city before the advancing Soviet army. Thousands of people took refuge in the city's underground, which the Nazis flooded to flush out cowards. Their corpses were still floating in the canals, rivers and lakes when the Western Allies arrived 2 months later. Many thousands more were still rotting in the streets and in the rubble of the surrounding buildings. The remaining population numbered roughly 3 million, of whom a little more than 2 million lived in the combined western sectors. Fully half of the population lost their homes in the course of the war, while the survivors of the additional 500,000 refugees trapped in the city during the closing days of the war likewise needed housing. Although most people had some kind of roof over their heads, many lived in what were essentially ruins, makeshift huts, garden sheds, and the like. As much as a third of the population lived in overcrowded, communal arrangements resulting from the city administration assigning homeless people to live in apartments with extra rooms. Stalin had agreed that the Western Allies would each control a sector of Berlin, however, stalled the deployment of Western occupation troops until 2 months after German surrender. When the Western Allies finally arrived in Berlin, they discovered that of the 38 gas storage tanks, only one was undamaged. Of the roughly 150 bridges necessary for movement across the city, 128 had been destroyed, most in the final days of the war. Fewer than 40 buses and about 100 trams were still serviceable. Only 4,000 of the 124,000 pre-war street lamps were still standing. The Soviets had appropriated so much cable that the number of telephone connections had been reduced from 600,000 to 4,000. In addition, only 23 of 84 sewage pumping stations working, with the result that drinking water was contaminated across the city. It was impossible to boil water to purify it, however, due to a lack of electricity. Strikingly, that lack of electricity was not due to military action. The reason was that when the Red Army alone occupied Berlin, the Soviets had systematically dismantled and removed the only modern power plant located in the western sectors. They did not dismantle the power plants in the Soviet sector of the city. Without clean water, dysentery was rife, but there were only 9,300 hospital beds available out of the 38,000 beds that had served the city before the Soviet offensive. Of the 44 hospitals in the 3 western sectors, 43 were severely damaged, and none had anesthetics, antibiotics or antibacterials. Soviet soldiers had machine-gunned and thrown hand grenades into the Red Cross warehouses, destroying invaluable medical supplies, many of which the Red Army lacked and could have used. Thus, right up to the start of the blockade of Berlin, medicine, anesthetics, bandages, surgical gloves, and essentially every other kind of medical equipment remained scarce. Berlin underwent another kind of trauma in this period as well. Historians estimate there as many as 1 million German women were raped in Berlin during the first 6 months of the Soviet occupation. Although the first paroxysm of sexual violence occurred during the first 2 months of occupation, the wave of violence targeting women did not cease with the arrival of the Western Allies. The hospitals in the British sector alone, for example, treated hundreds of rape cases every single night for most of 1945. Reported rape cases, however, represented only the tip of the iceberg because many women did not seek medical care. Furthermore, many of the women seeking medical assistance reported being subjected to multiple rapes, sometimes in front of their children or parents. Many rapes were gang rapes, carried out by 6 or more men, often at gunpoint. The victims included women as old as 80 and girls as young as 8. Some women reported being raped more than 20 times. Soviet officers recorded entering homes in which the bodies of women and young girls were left draped over pieces of furniture, all dead from excessive sexual abuse. In addition, the Soviets expropriated wholesale the contents of the Berlin museums, the royal palaces, and the homes of captains of industry. An entire train was needed to carry from Berlin to Moscow the gold of Troy, the altar of Pergamon, the gates of Babylon, thousands of Greek sculptures and vases, and the paintings by European masters. Yet far more damaging to the structure of civil society was that the Soviets broke into ordinary homes and apartments to take whatever they liked. They even stripped refugees and displaced persons of their watches, their wedding rings, and such like. The magnitude of the problem is best illustrated by the fact that Soviet soldiers also stole light bulbs and toilet seats, thinking they would provide light and a flush toilet wherever they put them. Yet if such incidents illustrate that nothing was safe from Soviet theft, the greater problem lay in the fact that the Soviet leadership found nothing reprehensible about the behavior of their troops. The Soviets routinely stopped trains moving between Berlin and the Soviet zone, including the Allied trains, ostensibly to check for papers, but effectively to facilitate pilfering on the part of Red Army soldiers, who rifled through the meager possessions the German civilians carried with them to take whatever caught their fancy. Meanwhile, the Allies were confronting the consequences of Germany's economic collapse. Admittedly, the Allied strategic bombing campaign had contributed materially to the deplorable state of Germany's industry and infrastructure, yet the Soviets hampered reconstruction. By steadfastly refusing to fix the overall size of the reparations Germany owed, Stalin effectively made them infinite at the price of crushing German economic recovery. Furthermore, being good Marxists, the Soviets preferred to confiscate the means of production or the products rather than accept payments in cash. The Soviets did not confine themselves to stealing things, they also kidnapped tens of thousands of people. Some of those dragged from their beds at night and put onto trains with only a handful of belongings were scientists and engineers, men expected to help rebuild Soviet industry with their skills and know-how. Many more were simply workers, mostly women, who were sent as industrial slaves to help rebuild the Soviet Union. The old German currency, the Reichsmark, collapsed with German unconditional surrender. Although new money was issued by the occupation powers, the Russians printed these occupation marks by the trillion without serial numbers. As a result, they are literally worth less than lavatory paper, and Berlin had a barter economy. This favored those who already possessed something of value and disadvantaged those, such as refugees or those bombed out of their homes, who had already lost everything. Perhaps worst of all, it made wages worthless, destroying the incentive to work. The shortage of employment opportunities combined with the worthless currency drove large portions of the population into criminal activities. In addition to the thriving black market, Berlin was plagued by drug dealing, illegal gun running, forgery and counterfeiting rings, and prostitution. On the eve of the Berlin blockade, Berlin's infrastructure and industrial capacity had been shattered by the combined weight of massive strategic bombing, the final assault on the city, and a deliberate Soviet post-war policy of dismantling, stealing or vandalizing anything of industrial value. On top of these scars were the double traumas of millions of brutal rapes and tens of thousands of kidnappings. While the Berliners reserved the greatest antipathy for the Ivans, whose brutality had sparked visceral hatred, they had also become contemptuous of the Western Allies because the latter failed to stop Soviet theft, chicanery or violence. By early 1948, Germany was slipping backwards into increasing dependency on handouts from the United States to avoid widespread undernourishment. Nothing appeared to be working, least of all, power, government. Operation Vittles was the brainchild of General Lucius D. Clay, the American military governor in Germany. The goal was to supply the besieged city solely by air, an ambitious undertaking that required meticulous planning and coordination. Clay, along with his advisors, recognized the immense logistical challenges but also saw an opportunity to demonstrate the resolve of the Western Allies. The United States Air Force, USAF, assumed the primary responsibility for the operation, under the command of General William H. Tunner. The airlift's success relied heavily on the availability of airfields and aircraft capable of transporting substantial cargo. The Berlin Tempelhof and Gotha airports, located in the American and British sectors, respectively, became crucial hubs for the operation. Both the United States and Great Britain agreed to attempt an airlift and committed all their available resources. The RAF contributed roughly one-third of all flights and took responsibility for specialty cargoes such as salt, liquid fuels and passengers. In addition, the RAF flew out of Berlin products produced in the blockaded city, a major factor in keeping Berliners employed. In October, the two airlifts were combined into a combined airlift task force, under U.S. General Tunner. On June 26, 1948, just 2 days after the blockade began, the first C-47 transport aircraft took off from the United States to initiate the airlift. Over time, the fleet grew to include larger aircraft such as C-54 Skymasters, which significantly increased the airlift's capacity. The operation operated around the clock, with planes departing every few minutes, creating a constant stream of supplies flowing into West Berlin. The logistics of Operation Vittles were daunting. Each aircraft had to navigate narrow air corridors to avoid Soviet airspace, facing the risk of interception or collision. The pilots flew at low altitudes, battling unpredictable weather conditions and reduced visibility. The maintenance crews worked tirelessly to keep the aircraft in top condition, as the demanding schedule placed significant strain on both man and machine. A critical challenge was meeting the immense demand for supplies. Food, coal, medicine, and other essential goods were airlifted to West Berlin, ensuring the city's survival during the blockade. The airlift also facilitated the transportation of vital personnel, allowing doctors, engineers, and other professionals to continue their work in the isolated city. The courage and perseverance demonstrated by the airmen during Operation Vittles captured the world's attention. Despite the dangerous conditions and overwhelming odds, the airlift continued to bring hope to West Berliners. The pilots became heroes in the eyes of the city's residents, who affectionately referred to them as raisin bombers, due to the small packages of candy they dropped during their flights. Operation Vittles had profound geopolitical implications as well. The success of the airlift showcased the commitment of the Western Allies to protecting West Berlin and the determination to counter Soviet aggression. The blockade, intended to undermine the Allies' position, ultimately backfired, resulting in the consolidation of Western influence in the city. As tensions eased, the blockade officially ended on May 12, 1949. The airlift continued for a few more months, ensuring a smooth transition and reassuring the people of West Berlin. In total, over 278,000 flights delivered approximately 2.3 million tons of supplies during the airlift, an astounding achievement that defied the odds. Operation Vittles left an indelible mark on history, emphasizing the power of unity and resilience. It stands as a testament to the triumph of humanitarian values in the face of adversity. The airlift not only saved a city but also laid the foundation for future collaborations between nations, fostering a spirit of cooperation and camaraderie. Operation Vittles, or the Berlin Airlift, was a monumental undertaking that transformed a seemingly insurmountable challenge into a symbol of hope and determination. The airlift's success demonstrated the unwavering commitment of the Western Allies and delivered essential supplies to the besieged city of West Berlin, effectively foiling the Soviet blockade. Operation Vittles holds a place of honor in history, representing the resilience of the human spirit and the power of international cooperation. The brave pilots, ground crew, and countless others involved in the operation risked their lives to ensure the survival of an entire city. Their efforts not only secured the freedom of West Berlin but also laid the groundwork for future collaborations and a more interconnected world. Operation Vittles will forever be remembered as a shining example of solidarity in the face of adversity. The Berlin Candy Bomber, sweetness in the bleak post-war world. World War II was a time of immense destruction and suffering, and no city was more devastated than Berlin. When 3 years after the end of the war, the Soviet Union imposed a blockade on the western sectors, putting the population under siege, the situation seemed hopeless. In the midst of this darkness, however, emerged an extraordinary figure known as the Berlin candy bomber. This American pilot became an emblem of hope and goodwill by dropping candy parachutes from his aircraft to children in the besieged city of Berlin. His act of kindness transcended the boundaries of politics and brought joy to countless lives during a time of despair. This content episode delves into the heartwarming story of the Berlin candy bomber, exploring the motivations behind his actions and the profound impact he had on the lives of those he touched. To understand the significance of the Berlin candy bomber, it is important to first delve into the historical context of post-World War II Berlin. Following Germany's defeat, the city was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the Allied powers: the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The city faced immense hardships, particularly in the western-controlled area, where the blockade by Soviet forces led to severe shortages of food and essential supplies. In the midst of this dire situation, Lieutenant Gail Halvorson, an American pilot serving in the Berlin Airlift, emerged as a beacon of hope. Known as the candy bomber, Halvorson developed a deep empathy for the children of Berlin and wanted to do something to uplift their spirits. Inspired by the kindness of a group of children who waved at him from behind a barbed wire fence, Halvorson resolved to drop candy to the children during his next flight. Halvorson devised a simple yet ingenious plan. He attached small parachutes made from handkerchiefs and handkerchief strings to candy bars and other treats. As he flew over the city, he would wiggle the wings of his plane to signal the children below that he was about to drop the candy. The sight of parachutes descending from the sky filled with sweets brought immense joy to the children, and the act soon gained widespread attention. Candy Bomber's act of kindness brought a ray of hope and joy to the children of Berlin. In a city devastated by war and surrounded by despair, the candy drops provided a momentary escape from their harsh reality. The children eagerly awaited the next flight of the Candy Bomber, their spirits lifted by the promise of something sweet in their lives. The candy drops not only satisfied their craving for sweets but also became a symbol of solidarity and goodwill. The children shared the candy with their friends and families, spreading happiness in their communities. The Candy Bomber's actions inspired others to join in, and soon, candy donations poured in from all over the United States. The Berlin Candy Bomber's actions transcended the borders of war-torn Berlin and had a global impact. As news of his candy drops spread, the Candy Bomber became a symbol of hope, compassion, and the resilience of the human spirit. People around the world were touched by his selfless act and sent letters, candy, and other donations to support his mission. The candy drops and the story of the Candy Bomber also had a profound effect on the pilots participating in the Berlin Airlift. They realized that their mission was not just about delivering supplies but also about bringing joy and hope to the people they served. The Candy Bomber's example inspired many pilots to go beyond the duty and find ways to connect with the people they were helping. The Berlin Candy Bomber, Lieutenant Gail Halvorson, showed the world the power of a small act of kindness in the face of adversity. His decision to drop candy to the children of Berlin during the challenging times of the Berlin Airlift brought a sense of hope and happiness to thousands of lives. The candy drops not only provided a momentary escape from the hardships of war but also instilled a sense of camaraderie and goodwill among people across the globe. The story of the Berlin Candy Bomber serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, acts of kindness can make a significant difference. It shows the capacity of individuals to rise above the turmoil of war and bring a glimmer of joy to those in need. The Candy Bomber's legacy continues to inspire generations, reminding us of the transformative power of compassion, empathy, and a small, sweet gesture in the face of overwhelming challenges. You can learn more about the Berlin Airlift in this remarkable historical novel, Cold Peace, by Helena P. Schrader. Three years after World War II, Europe struggles with rationing, widespread unemployment and a growing Soviet threat. Hitler's former capital lies ruined under the joint control of wartime allies bitterly at odds. With the currency worthless, the population lives on handouts or turns to crime and prostitution. Deep inside the Soviet zone of occupation, Berlin appears to be an ideal target for a communist takeover, putting the defenders of democracy on a collision course with Stalin's merciless aggression. A Battle of Britain ace, a female air traffic controller, a concentration camp survivor and an ex-ATA woman pilot are just some of those trying to find their place in the post-war world. An air ambulance service offers a shimmer of hope, but when a Soviet fighter brings down a British passenger liner, Berlin becomes a flashpoint. The world stands poised on the brink of World War III. Helena P. Schrader is an established aviation author and expert on the Second World War. She earned a Ph.D. in history from the University of Hamburg with a groundbreaking dissertation on a leading member of the German resistance to Hitler. Her non-fiction publications include Sisters in Arms, The Women Who Flew in World War II, The Blockade Breakers, The Berlin Airlift, codename Valkyrie, General Friedrich Olbricht and The Plot Against Hitler. In addition, Helena is the author of 19 historical novels and winner of numerous literary awards. Her novel On the Battle of Britain, Where Eagles Never Flew, won the Hemingway Award for 20th Century Wartime Fiction and a Maincrest Media Award for Historical Fiction. RAF Battle of Britain Ace Wing Commander Bob Doe called it the best book he had ever seen about the battle. Moral Fiber, a bomber pilot's story, likewise won a Hemingway Award, a Maincrest Media Award and was a finalist for a Book Excellence Award. You can learn more about the RAF pilots and the stigma of lacking moral fiber at our previous content episode at the Historical Fiction Company's YouTube channel. Buy Cold Peace by Helena P. Schrader today. Now at Amazon or at www.helenapschrader.com. Thank you for listening to the History Bards Podcast historical content episode. To have your historical novel developed into a historical content episode, please contact us at the Historical Fiction Company at gmail.com. Videos and images by Shutterstock, Public Domain, Internet Archives, National Archives, Invideo and Wikipedia. Music by Epidemic Sound.